All right. Well, hey everybody. Welcome to Adventures in Angular, episode 63. I almost said 163, but we're not quite there yet. um, this week on our panel we have Lucas Rubelkey.
Hello.
We also have a few guests joining us. We have Rob Warmald. Welcome to Adventures in
Hello.
Angular. We also have Patrick Stapleton.
Hey guys.
John and Ward are going to be joining us here in a little bit. John had to go pick up one of his kids, and Ward, I guess, is watching his other kids, which is kind of a scary proposition if you really think about that. But anyway, so we are doing this on Crowdcast. If you're watching it on YouTube Live, you probably want to head over there. crowdcast.io/e/CharlesWood5 is where it's at. And there's a chat room and some Q&A. So we'll just go ahead and start with the first question in there, mainly because this is something that I am curious about. And I also have this question got asked to Brad Green when we did Angular Remote Conf, and so there was some interesting feedback there too. But anyway, the question is basically, I'll just read it word for word. It says, first and most important question. Actually, I don't think the feedback was from Brad. I think it was from another episode of the show. Anyway, first and most important question: When is Angular 2 out? But seriously, with Angular 2 final nowhere in sight, do you feel that other frameworks, cough React, are starting to become more popular, and will people bother to go back to Angular 2 once they have learned React? I'm holding out learning yet another framework, but it's becoming more and more difficult as employers start moving over to React. And then in parentheses he says, I'm a contractor and have recently started noticing employers wanting React over Angular.
Rob, do you want to take this or do you want me to?
Sure. I guess I can start. The short answer is it'll be ready when it's ready. So there's not like a good answer to that question. But I think the second part of the question, like will people come back? I think the short answer to that is yes. Like it's crazy fast. Like I'm quite a fan of React. There's a lot of. Oh, hey Ward.
Oh, it looks like we've got Ward and John.
This is a backup. This is an old show.
Yeah, we brought in some help because we couldn't find you guys.
Ward and John 2.0.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Show. What's going on here?
We're answering questions. We're talking about why people should do React.
But more importantly, Ward, are you even wearing pants right now? That's what everybody wants to know. He's stunned into silence. This is
He's
Ward,
muted.
we're live.
Muted.
Nobody can hear you, Ward.
I didn't realize you were live.
Yeah, we are live.
Wow, I'm messing up the show.
It's all good.
All right, well, here I am, a face in the dark. It's good to see friends, though.
Ward, don't be alarmed, but there's a really tall, bald guy right behind you. Oh,
my God! Okay, so I have totally derailed you. How far into the show are we?
We just started.
Okay.
So the question that we're answering is basically, and I think we've talked about this on past episodes, but when is Angular 2 going to be out? We don't know. So since we don't know when it's going to be out, looks like more people are moving over toward React, and are they going to come back? Should we hold out learning React? And this is asked by a contractor who's starting to notice people moving to React because Angular 2 isn't out.
Wow, it's all Rob's fault.
Well, Rob was actually going to explain to us, so.
So yeah, I guess the first part of that question, like when is it out? Short answer is when it's ready. I think when it's awesome. Will people come back, and should you learn React instead of this? I think yeah, people will come back because it's incredible. Even in the sort of early state it's in right now, it's awesome. It's crazy awesome. And like, should you learn React? I think that as like an Angular guy, right? I think that React is a really cool framework, and I think that I don't want to say that Angular 2 kind of learns from React, but I think there's a lot of kind of similar conceptual stuff, and I think that learning a little bit of React is not a bad thing, and I think would probably help you be better at Angular 2, would be the way I would put that, right? Like you can use Angular 2 very much in a way that you're used to using Angular 1, but you can use Angular 2 also in much more of a sort of React-y one-way data flow kind of way, right? So yeah, I think anything you do with React is gonna help you with Angular 2 when you get to that point, and I think a lot of the same sort of principles apply. Be my answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to learn a variety of frameworks, just like it's a great idea to learn a bunch of languages. I would go look at Aurelia too. I think you should survey the field. I'd look at Ember, because they've been making changes. If you're of the mindset to be looking at frameworks right now and trying to make decisions, I think you should survey the field. Because like learning other languages and databases and so forth, you get important insights into what it is that you finally want to do. And then when the time comes to make a choice, you can make it. And as Rob says, I think there will be many people will find Angular 2 to be a fine choice.
You had me until you said Ember. Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting though, because a lot of times we feel like we've kind of picked Angular, and people don't want to be wrong. But and the other thing is I feel this camaraderie with other Angular folks that if I go and find out that React actually is better, then my life has changed. Good thing or bad thing, you can make that distinction. But yeah, overall, I completely agree. I mean, go learn the way that they do things, and then if it turns out that you miss Angular land, then come back. And if you find out that React is better for certain applications, then use the right tool.
I mean, the big secret is that like the Angular team and the React team talk, and they, like Angular 2 will theoretically be able to use React Native, right? Like there's not like it's a do one or the other for the rest of your life. There's a lot of overlap, and everybody's friends, and I don't think that the sort of framework wars are as they say they are. But
I don't want to hear this. I'm an Angular purist.
But let me jump in here real quick. I think there's a lot to be said about actually going to other frameworks and seeing how they're doing things, because a lot of times we get blinders on it, like, well, this is how Angular does it, and that's as far as we go. And so looking at like React and being like, well, hey, like, what is this functional reactive thing that I've been hearing about? Or even entirely different languages, to the point where I think a lot of really good ideas in JavaScript have actually come from the Clojure camp. And so, for instance, functional JavaScript, which was written by Michael Fogus, he's a Clojure guy, and it's just a phenomenal piece of work that he's put together around functional programming in JavaScript. And so just going out and trying new things expands your horizons, and you can always come back to Angular or whatever framework you use, but now you've got a different perspective, which I think ultimately makes you a better developer.
And I think we're all used to the Angular way, right? Like do it the Angular way. And I think that the fact that Angular 2 is very much like a kind of ground up brand new framework means that like the Angular way that we know may not be the Angular 2 way, right? And I think it's good to go and see what the other guys are doing, as Lucas says, to kind of see what maybe is the better way to do Angular 2. What's the next Angular 2 way to do things?
Yeah.
I think,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think like venturing out to other frameworks and everything is good for getting perspective and like different ways of doing things. So like I created a list called Awesome Angular 2 to showcase like the breadth of the Angular 2 ecosystem, how it's going to grow. Essentially, it's showing like Angular 2 in like different languages other than just JavaScript. And this is to kind of show that like there's other parts of the ecosystem that's going to branch out. Like example, like what came out of Clojure, all the cool stuff that came out of Clojure that leaked into JavaScript because of React. We're going to see the exact same thing in Angular 2 when it's released, and we see like how it ties into these other ecosystems and how like the developers there will start contributing to their version of Angular 2, which will trickle down to the JavaScript version, but then everyone kind of wins. So it's like it's the number one thing about Angular, in my opinion, is the community, and that's just because of like how like the community was born, and I think because of that, like that's why you can't like ask a developer, like that's why you could go around and ask any like developer, and they pretty much know about Angular, and that's because of the community is like so huge and everything.
I think a lot of the anxiety that comes out of this is one, I mean, nobody wants to use old stuff, right? I mean, we all want to be using the latest and greatest thing. And so the fact that there's an Angular 2 somewhere out there on the horizon means that we want to be using it, and we want to be a part of it. The other thing is that most frameworks that I've used, either on the front end or the back end, if there's a major version change like this, they are breaking changes and incompatibilities. And so there's a lot of anxiety over the Angular 2 way being so different from the Angular 1 way that it, working in Angular 1 now basically is obsolete knowledge. And the feeling that I've gotten over and over and over again from the Angular team is that that just isn't the case here with Angular 2. But the other issue we have is then trying to explain this to people who aren't in the Angular space, like our clients and our bosses. We want to keep using the quote-unquote older technology, or the technology that's kind of still coming out, or that's already out, rather than the stuff that's still coming out. They want to use the latest and greatest stuff too, and they don't understand that Angular 1 is still a powerful framework that does a lot of good things, and so basically the thing that we're facing here is wanting to be up on this stuff, and then our bosses thinking, okay, well, let's just hold out until Angular 2, and they've been holding out for months now, and they're getting impatient because they want to get work done.
So I think that that there's two parts to that, right? That the first is that the thing about Angular 2 is it's much closer to JavaScript, right? There's a lot less sort of Angular-y things about it, right? And so in terms of starting a new project today, I don't think it's definitely not a good idea, and I'm not going to say on a podcast ever starting Angular 2 today, right? Not a good idea. But certainly be aware, go play with it, see how it works, and there's a lot you could do. You could probably write, I don't know, your entire data layer of your application in such a way that it would be reasonably straightforward to drop it into an Angular 2 application. There's a lot you can kind of do that write code today that isn't going to sort of prevent you from moving to Angular 2 when it's ready. And of course, there's the whole NG upgrade thing, right? So the ability to kind of run them interleaved with each other, which I think will be a huge thing. And we're just starting to see that evolve. But I think that as a thing should hopefully sort of soothe a lot of those fears that people have. That it's going to be pretty cool when they're sort of running one within the other. And so if you write an Angular 1 app today, and then a few months from now you want to be able to write an Angular 2 component for the first time and drop it into your Angular 1 app and kind of do it incrementally, that to me is a really nice kind of middle ground solution, right? And use TypeScript today would be my thing, right? If you use TypeScript today, everything's awesome. You're 80% of the way to Angular 2 anyway, and it makes that kind of stuff nice and easy to drop in the future.
The only other thing that I can see there, though, is people saying, okay, well, let's say I write it in Angular 1 now. Do I have to do a complete rewrite when I move to Angular 2? And what you're saying is if you do it in TypeScript, then not so much.
Well, I mean, I don't think TypeScript's not a requirement for that, but I think that the point is that if you write an Angular 1 app today, you'll be able to incrementally upgrade it to Angular 2 rather than gutting the whole thing and starting all over again. That's one of the big goals, I think, of the NG upgrade project, is to allow you to, as things come online and as things are ready, sort of swap it out piece by piece. So if you want to make a grid component in Angular 2 that's super fast and drop it into your Angular 1 app, you can do that, right? So no, I don't think it's a do one or the other kind of thing.
I also think that we put too much emphasis on the syntax and the technology, and not enough on what I've always found to be the hard part of building an application, which is getting the design right, getting the user experience right, getting the flows right, figuring out what goes where, what's the structure of the approach, how am I going to navigate, what should it do in terms of getting the data, what kind of data should it present? I mean, these are tough questions, and you spend a lot of time building any application rethinking those things over and over again as you evolve and learn really what the application should do. And it's my sense that if you were to do that with the sort of architectures and strategies that you know from Angular 1, that you end up in a place that isn't so distant from what you would do in Angular 2. You're still going to have to create those templates. You're still going to have to figure out where it goes on the screen. You're still going to be thinking in terms of dependency injection as the mechanism by which you assemble the parts. You're still going to have a router, and you're going to navigate from point A to point B. So the syntax is going to change. But the basic way in which you figured out what your application should do and how you should break it into parts that fit together, you know, at the level of what I think is the hard part of an application, I think working in Angular 1 puts you in great shape for going to an Angular 2.
So what you're saying is how you solve the problem is more important than how cool your stack is?
I'm afraid that that is my position.
Yeah, I would also agree with that, because like the majority of the performance problems that people would run into with Angular 1 is developer code itself. Someone released a JS repaint challenge, which is really interesting because it's basically like measuring the repaint rate for each framework. What was interesting is that if you actually look at the Angular 1 performance optimization version, which is just using TrackBy, the Angular 2, and the React version, which is also optimized, you'll see that Angular 1 is actually faster than React. You'll see that Angular 2 is actually faster than React. And then you realize that the problem isn't really performance. It's really just the developer code. It's really just the developers writing more performant code or better organizations. Because that's what a framework really is. It's just allowing you to maintain your code in a better way.
And on top of that, even a lot of times people ask me like, well, what's your best Angular advice for writing code? And actually, my playbook for that actually has nothing to do with Angular. It actually comes from Clean Code, which is actually kind of a Java-centric book, but it talks about kind of single responsibility things, fine-grained code, and even to the point where I actually went and read John Papa's style guide the other day, just start to finish, and a lot of the advice in there actually can be tied back to just general good programming principles. So they're not necessarily like Angular has introduced these new programming paradigms that have never existed. Is that a lot of times, if you have a good sense of what makes good code, and you understand these best practices across the board, i.e., Clean Code or the style guide, then moving from 1 to 2 or any other language for that matter is not nearly as complex as it would appear to be because you have that strong foundation.
I think there's a mental hurdle that a lot of people have when they're looking at learning new technologies. And keep in mind, we just came off of doing a hackathon for Angular 2 just yesterday. And I see this not just there, but in the enterprise that I work in and the people I talk to at conferences of, wow, there's so many things to look at when I'm solving this problem. And this could go with technology or building a house or having a family. When you look at the 5,000 things you have to do to accomplish to get to your goal, everything's overwhelming. Everything is, oh my gosh, not only is my cheese moved when it's not even cheese anymore, but you have to look at the problem and solve things one piece at a time. And when you look at what it takes to go from Angular 1 to Angular 2 or to go from another framework into Angular 2, if you've never done Angular 1, I think when you start taking the pieces apart, and as Ward said, how do I assemble my pieces? What are my pieces? Do I have something that does logic? Do I have a template somewhere? You start breaking these things down, they're not so hard. They're very discrete pieces that you can assemble on your own. When you start trying to figure out how all the plumbing's working and you look at everything as a whole, it's kind of the forest for the trees, it's overwhelming, like anything is. So I think the key here is to remember when you're looking at anything new, whether it's Angular or Go or whatever you're looking at, Docker, you want to make sure that you're looking at what do you want to accomplish, take it piece by piece, step by step. Everything's overwhelming when you do it all at once.
Yeah, more on that point, like one of the differences in Angular 1 and Angular 2 in terms of like architecture is component-driven design. And a component, you can think of it as just in Angular 1 as just a controller, right? You have a controller and then you have a template. Now the difference between that and Angular 2 is that you have many components and they go into each other. And what it's really doing is just allowing you to divide the problem into smaller sets, so it's easy for you to reason about like what's going on. So like if you were to write Angular 1 style application in Angular 2, you would have like 3 components or something, and then your template would be huge because it's to mimic the exact same like template design in Angular 1, and putting everything in the controller in Angular 2's case like component, which is just a class. So yeah.
I would argue that when I design my Angular 1 application, I'm constantly refactoring that down into what look like the components that they're going to be in Angular 2. It's kind of an anti-pattern in Angular 1 to have this gigantic piece of HTML that goes on forever and a gigantic controller with thousands of lines in it. We've seen it, we've all seen it, but that's an anti-pattern. That's not good Angular 1, and it's certainly not going to be good Angular 2. So if your practice of Angular 1 is good, I think you're going to end up with parts that translate very favorably over to Angular 2 when the time comes. I also want to say that this is, we talked at the beginning, like everybody loves everybody, we got to look at everybody, and it's not like we're going to give an award for participation at the end, everybody goes home with a ribbon. I mean, we're ultimately going to have to decide, okay? And so you are going to make a decision, and I think people will come down in different places, but I think that Angular 2 is going to win a lot of business because it's going to be that good. And it's although we keep talking about not knowing when it's going to arrive, the arrival is in sight. That's fair to say, don't you think, Rob? It's not. And Patrick, it's not like it's another. I don't think we're waiting another year by any means. So. I think you're going to have something. I think you're going to find something that you like after you look around, and it could very well be Angular 2. And I don't think you're going to be. I think it's going to be a fine choice. I don't think you're going to ever regret it.
I think if you like Angular 1, then you will love Angular 2. I think is the way that I think about it, right? Like, if you like the way, if you're an Angular dev now and you like it, and you kind of like the things about Angular that makes Angular Angular, then Angular 2 kind of sort of carries over all those concepts, but makes a lot of them 10 times better, right? And I think that's kind of the way to think about it for me.
So,
and I don't think it was just us that felt that way. I noticed that at the hackathon. The people who there were groups. Most of the people had some Angular 1 experience.
Mm-hmm. Keep going. You're good.
I think you cut out a little bit there.
Yep. So I guess the question, though, is, and I can totally see this from the point of view of being a contractor. I mean, I've done a fair amount of that. And, so how do you explain to your client when they come to you and say, well, Angular 2 isn't out yet, and you want to use Angular 1? I mean, how can we boil this down to a good explanation of why to go with Angular, or, whether or not they should go ahead and pick React?
I would say that the community is a lot more advanced because it's been here for like 6 years, right? And the React community is still just beginning, so not everything's built out. There's still, like, right now, if anyone's in the React world, they'll know that, like, there's kind of this thing of everyone trying to figure out, like, what's a good router now, because like, everything changed, and then now they're like, oh, well, let's use this router. It's like, let's do this router. In Angular, you at least have a baseline experience of everything. You have, like, a router provider for you and everything. But more on the point of Angular 1, like, everything's already set in there for you. Like, you could Google pretty much an error and find it in Stack Overflow. Like, everything's there. And the thing is, like, you could build really, really fast with Angular 1. And that's kind of like its strengths, is that you could prototype things extremely fast with it.
If you want to build applications that work for your business today, Angular 1's a great way to go. It's mature, and it works, and there's problems we've already fallen into holes on and climbed our way out of with Angular 1 that we haven't done so on other frameworks that are younger and less mature.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And ultimately, if you're a contractor and you're talking to folks, I mean, I do another show on freelancing where we talk about this stuff. And, I mean, find out what the problems that they need solved are, and then explain how you'll solve them with Angular 1. And then if they're concerned, well, what about Angular 2 coming out? Then you can say, look, if you need the performance characteristics or the other advantages that come out of Angular 2 when it comes out, then they've got a really clean and clear upgrade path. But for right now, let's get something out there that works and works well, and and give them the value proposition on what you're going to do for them, as opposed to quibbling over technology. The other thing is that you, as the contractor or programmer, are the expert in the technology. They aren't. And so, I'm not saying you go beat them over the head with that, but I have pointed out to several people that you hired me to understand the technology for you, and this is the way I understand it.
I'm going to throw another thing into the pot, which is this. I've been spending my time here looking at some Angular 2, and I knew Angular 1. And I would say that I know for everything I ever did in Angular 1 how I would do it in Angular 2. I know exactly how to get from point A to point B. Now I can't say that I would know how to get, because I don't know React that well or some of these other frameworks that well, so I can't give you that assurance that everything you do and almost the way you do it, not talking syntax here, but the way you think about solving a problem, I know the exact way to get from whatever it is you're doing today in Angular 1 to wherever the way you're going to do it in Angular 2, and it's not going to be a hard leap. Now, you can trust me, you can not trust me, whatever, but I know that as much as I know my own name, and I think some of the others of us who have been living with Angular 2 would be able to make that same statement. I'm looking at some nodding heads, but go ahead and say it, guys.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. You can, having been in the guts of it for a while, I think that a huge amount of the concepts port over, right? Like the names of some things changed, and okay, we're going back and forth on some names of some things right now, but I think conceptually, everything you know how to do in Angular 1 will pretty much port over to Angular 2. It'll just be that much better, right? And I think we keep having this like Angular versus React discussion, and I don't know that that's a valid, because it's really, if you're going to choose React, you choose React, and then you've got to choose some way to manage your data. And are we going to do Redux? Are we going to do Flux? Are we going to do, Reflux? Whatever the 12 different, there are not. Reflux. It's not the same sort of decision. I think there is actually a Reflux now.
There should be, and it makes ACID guarantees, so therefore it's ACID Reflux.
Oh, you beat me to that one, man.
Oh, I knew it was coming.
So yeah, and I think that like it maintains the same sort of like complete package that you get from Angular 1, right? It's just everything is that much better. I'm going to say that probably like 12 more times.
Well, I'll go one step further on you on that, Rob. That's, if you're going to use React, use React. Go for it. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not going to try to stop anybody from using any framework they want to use. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you want to use Angular 2, go for it. I don't think anybody should be trying to convince anybody else to use a framework, right? If you want to use Angular, you want to use React, go for it. I do believe that today that it's a great idea to start looking at Angular 2 and figuring out how it works, whatever, so you can make your own evaluation and your own determination on what you can build tomorrow when it comes out. But I'm not going to sit here and say use Aurelia, use React, use Angular. Make your own determination.
That's true. I mean, we are looking for results, right? Does it work? Does it do what it needs to do? I think we also kind of answered this other question, but I'm going to pull it out because it's a similar question, and that is, I'm a beginner in programming. I've been learning Angular as my first framework. Should I go ahead with Angular 1 or wait for Angular 2 and stop wasting my time on Angular? If I should continue with Angular 1, will there still be job opportunities with those with Angular 1 skills or not? And I think we've said, all of the concepts translate through. All of the experience is going to be very relevant from Angular 1 to Angular 2. Is there anything you want to add to that from somebody coming in as a beginner?
If you want a job today, Angular 1 is probably still the best framework. Like, there are a billion Angular jobs out there, right, at the moment. Yep. They're not going away anytime soon. I think that if you learn Angular 1, then you can be the awesome guy who comes in, a year from now and helps them upgrade to Angular 2, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. But there is absolutely, and again, like everybody else has said, though, it's, if you're a new programmer, you should be learning best practice programming, right? Best practice application development, and that applies to Angular 1, Angular 2, React, Aurelia, whatever you want, right? Like, that's, your focus should very much be, how do I properly architect an application, regardless of the sort of tech stack behind it.
I would just like to point out that people are still making money writing classic ASP.
True. All right, let's go ahead and get the next question. The next one is, to TypeScript or not to TypeScript, Angular 2?
Yes, TypeScript, absolutely.
TypeScript, yeah.
Next.
TypeScript.
Anyone disagree?
No, I can't. I mean, the more you spend time with it and with the tooling that supports it, the more you say, "Hey, I'm glad to have it."
And I guess I will mention one of the big kind of irritating things, if you like, about TypeScript previously has been this idea of the TSD or the TS or whatever the d.ts file, and then this kind of TSD indefinitely types and all the kind of rigmarole that goes along with that. The TypeScript team in 1.6 has added some really cool stuff as far as like getting types distributable through NPM, and so that whole kind of ecosystem, if you've used it before, is improving very, very rapidly. And I think that if you like, we've sort of dragged TypeScript into the light, and it's improving very, very rapidly. And the tooling around it, I think the next maybe 2 builds from now of Angular 2 will be sort of like 3 steps and you're up and running with types, not completion, and everything. Like it's once it's up and running, it's amazing. And I would say the challenge right now is there's a little bit of configuration to get it working properly, but I have seen the future of that, and it looks really, really awesome. So
John and I had a very funny experience yesterday at the hackathon. We would watch people who were new to TypeScript taking it on, and they would start typing away in something like Visual Studio Code, and the IDE would be sitting there and telling them what the method was going to be and how to spell it. And everybody is so used to not having any help whatsoever that they would ignore all the help that they were getting and keep typing and scratching their head and wondering how it was spelled. And the idea is saying, "Hey, it's right here. I'll even tell you how to use it." It's going to take a while for people to get used to the idea that maybe, just maybe, a language support could be helpful.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. So instead of saying, should I use TypeScript, let me ask people back. Would you like it if you could make less errors in your code? Would you like it if you could know what the API is for all the methods? Would you like it if it would autocomplete? Would you like it if it told you when you did something wrong before you actually ran the app? If you like these things, you may be a TypeScript addict.
That's just crazy talk.
It is really pretty crazy when you get autocomplete and you what? Yeah. It's pretty awesome. And I would say, like, even if you're not going to do Angular 2, like TypeScript in general, yeah, like if you've even slightly considered using ES6, you're sort of 90% of the way to TypeScript anyway. So you might as well just make the extra 10% jump, right? And I think ES6 is an absolute no-brainer. You should use that, and if you're going to use that, you might as well use TypeScript.
Yeah, and to chime in with what Ward said about the hackathon, it was shocking to me how many people I saw who literally, one guy was typing in a component's name. The component name was like, I don't know, character details thing component. Big, long 30-character name. And what they did is they started typing the whole darn thing in, and immediately, 3 letters in, it's like, this is the name. And they were misspelling it and keep going back, and the editor's blinking at them going, dude, it's right here.
That's
dude,
awesome.
It's right here. Dude. And I'm just watching it, looking, going, wow. And this was multiple people all night long. And this is not bad people, right? This is behavior. We're all driven to these tools. And for years, they haven't given us any help. And now they're screaming at us. And I think it's going to be amazing when people look up and see what's happening.
One other thing I want to point out with this, at Angular Remote Conf, we had probably 4 or 5 examples of basically live coding. I mean, usually the downfall with live coding is that your internet goes out, but with a remote conference, if your internet goes out, the live coding snafus don't matter. But anyway, it was really interesting because a lot of times all of the information for the component, including the template and some of the data definitions and things, were all in the same file. And so it was all in the same place, all of the information that you needed, including inline templates and everything else, because they built it in TypeScript and were kind of making it all work out that way. And my experience with other frameworks, I'm thinking Rails in particular, where you have a data model, and then you have the controller, and then you have the view, and they're all in different files. It was really nice to see that everything was kind of in the same place. And if TypeScript gets you there more easily than using ES6 or ES5, then it makes a lot of sense for me just to be able to put all that information in the same place.
And I think we've all, like, at some point as an Angular developer, you've probably complained about the Angular documentation at some point. it's massively improved over the years, but I think that you still have to go look it up and find out where it is on the web page. And to be able to just put your cursor over some class or something and have the IDE pop the docs up for you is pretty incredible, right? Like the amount of times I don't know that I go and jump into the Angular docs much with TypeScript, right? Like I think you'll just hover over it, it'll tell you what it's about, and if you document your own code, it'll tell you about your own code, which is just ridiculous, right? Like it's awesome.
And if you click on one of the things in like VS Code, for example, you click on one of the Angular things like a router, it'll actually take you right to the definition of it in the source code, which is pretty awesome.
So yes, TypeScript, absolutely do it.
All right. The next question is, how do you how do you integrate third-party libraries like Firebase or D3 into an NG2 app, taking into account that NG2 runs on one-way data flow paradigm fueled by an RX implementation?
You just use it. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't. If anything, some of these things are easier to use than they would have been under Angular 1. I'll give you a quick example. Let's suppose you decided to use jQuery.ajax to make your calls to go get the data. You can do that now. If you remember your Angular 1, you have to remember when the callback comes in to call the apply. Because if you don't do that, your Angular 1 app doesn't know that you went off, that you were cheating on them, and you left HTTP behind, and you went out with that cute jQuery Ajax. And so it just doesn't know that you were cheating. But Angular 2 knows you were cheating. It knows you used jQuery Ajax. It knows that it came back, and it just fits right in. So many of the different libraries that you may choose to use play more naturally with Angular 2 than they did in Angular 1. So actually, I think it's a strength of Angular 2.
And I think we should say, like, the fact that there's this one-way data flow paradigm and RX is in the core, and there's a lot of kind of reactive sort of things, and I talked about that at RemoteConf, right? But that's awesome, and it's great, and I think it does some really amazing stuff, but it's not required, right? Like there is still two-way data binding. It works slightly differently, but for all intents and purposes, it is still two-way data binding, right? And so I think the way you think about it doesn't really change. The way that it works under the hood might change a little bit, right? But you're still going to write a directive, or you're still going to write a component, right, that wraps your jQuery calendar or whatever. And so yeah, I think it's like the same kind of paradigms exist there, and it's.
Actually, you bring up something which I think is even better. Where you used to have to write a directive in order to interact with some of these things, in many cases you don't have to write a directive at all. You no longer have to say, oh, I'm stuck. I want to touch that thing in a way that it's not been touched before. I guess I'll have to go off and write a directive about it. No, oftentimes you can just use this straight-out Angular 2 binding to hook right up to whatever that thing is, and you're good to go. So a lot of the mess of custom directives goes out the window.
True.
All right, are we good on that one then? The next one is. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
I could add a little thing. So like, remember that Angular 2 is more of like pushing everything into the language and standards. So example, like, one of the requirements is working well with Polymer, and Polymer uses all the native event system and everything. So like, more to your point, like, you could use some other like third-party library that takes control over an element and then emits a native event, and you can hook into that with Angular 2, and that's great. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to add.
And you didn't have to write anything special because you were just using Angular 2 the way it was intended to be used.
Yep.
Nice. All right.
You know, the key to this stuff though is sorry, Chuck, but the key to this stuff is that when using Angular 2, you're really just using ECMAScript 6 or TypeScript. There's very few Angularisms that you're playing with. So using other libraries is actually easier in that sense because you don't have to worry about, oh, that's the Angular way. It's really just the JavaScript way.
So it's just using powerful language features that you already have because you're using Angular or ES6 or TypeScript.
Yeah, there's less things in your way.
All right, the next question is the TypeScript autocomplete / help, etc. that we were discussing before. What tools or IDEs are we talking about?
In theory, anything that supports TypeScript. So the Angular team is using a lot of Visual Studio Code, which is a really awesome thing. I think WebStorm does this. Visual Studio does this. I mean, I would think that probably any sort of modern IDE that speaks TypeScript should be able to work with this. I pretty much use Visual Studio Code all the time now. Atom does this for sure. I think Sublime probably will. I don't know. I can't speak for anything.
There's a plugin for Sublime that does this stuff. Yeah. And Visual Studio, like if you're a .NET programmer, I know there must be about 3 of them out there. I was shocked I had to do some of this stuff in Visual Studio directly. I fired that up often recently. It does a fine job of working with TypeScript. Really superb.
I've also seen plugins for Emacs. I use Emacs, and I've seen plugins for Emacs that do the kind of type ahead lookup and autocomplete and things like that. And it has TypeScript support for Emacs as well. I've seen several plugins for it. So, I haven't hooked those up yet, but I'm pretty sure that you can find plugins probably for even Emacs and Vim that will do a lot of what we're talking about here.
And it should be
relatively
easy.
Let me clarify something.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry. Yes, let me clarify something too that I think, and all those editors do have it. I've seen it in all of them, especially the hackathon we did yesterday. People use their own tool, but the one reason I like VS Code as well is that in all those editors, you have to add in a TypeScript plugin to make it work, which is fine, but in VS Code, it's actually baked in. So TypeScript is actually baked into Visual Studio Code. So if you want to use that, you download it and you're go. The other ones, you download your tool like Atom, and then you just add the plugin for TypeScript, and it's good to go.
And I think me being I'm a total OS 10, open source guy, and for me to be espousing the benefits of Microsoft's IDE for me should tell you how awesome it really is, right? That for me is incredible that I'm using a Microsoft language and a Microsoft IDE on my Mac every day, and it's what I want to use, right? It's a choice, and I love it. It's really, really, really good. So check out VS Code for sure.
All right. The next question is, what is the current state of the Angular 2 router?
Oh boy.
Oh man.
It's kind of an open-ended question, isn't it?
Functional, but not yet done, I think is a good way to put that. Right?
Oh, Rob,
yeah.
that's
How
nice
diplomatic.
and sad. Oh, you're a prince.
He's the politician.
It works. Everything I've tried to do with it for major functionality works perfectly fine. There are a few minor things, not big gaps, but minor gaps. Things like the otherwise route and stuff like that we had, I think that need to be filled in. It's a little awkward in a few places, and I think that's a fair way to say it, meaning I can make it do what I want, but for example, let me give you a concrete example. If you want to have a link, an href, and you want to go from one place to another with the router, it kind of works like UIRouter does. But instead of saying, hey, go to the route named this, you have to tell it, go to the route named this, but wrap that inside of this array and then pass it an object in that array that tells you the parameter name and the parameter value. And you end up putting a lot of stuff in there that it doesn't feel as natural as it should, in my opinion. It works great, but I think there's some syntactic sugar that the team can do that easier.
And I think I would say to be less diplomatic, and I will put my friend here, right, is that that the Angular 1 router that nobody uses because we all use the UI router route is kind of what it is. And I think that the Angular 2 router learns a lot from that. But one of the cool things about Angular 2 is it has this, I think it's currently called dynamic component loader, right? And its whole job is to pull stuff off disk and plop it into somewhere on the screen. And so a couple of weeks ago, I put together a plunker using reactive extensions and some of that. And I wrote a pretty functional basic router in 30 lines of code, right? So if the Angular router isn't going to do what you want to do, and I know the UI router guys are talking about how we're going to do UI router 2 for Angular 2, but it's so kind of, I guess the framework provides you the tools to do really whatever you want. So if you wanted to build your own router, you had some special use case where you wanted to dynamically load components and build a dashboard or whatever, that kind of stuff you could do without too much trouble in Angular 2. So again, I think that the framework is providing some pretty awesome tools, and the router, the current router, is just one kind of implementation of that, if you like.
Yeah, more on the syntax. So how it's more of what John's talking about, the router link. So the reason why it's the API is a little bit more terse is for another feature in Angular 2, and that's AST templates. So being able to say like R colon the arguments in a very like sugary way, like that's going to be available, and I think Rob could talk more about it, or maybe not. But like essentially, like that's the reason why it's more terse now. But like it's just another layer of sugar that's going to be added later. And to more of the point of features missing, I would say like I had a hard time like trying to figure out like how to convert a simple application with named routes. This is a UI router feature to Angular 2. There's also like missing like abstract routes, but like not a lot of people actually use these like I would say like advanced features in UI router. But yeah, it's coming along. Like async components is in there, and that's like it's really easy. It's like 10 lines if you can actually look at the source code, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think if you start at the bottom and build up, I mean, the concepts are solid, I believe, in the router. And I believe the functionality is there. To me, the next, and that's, to be fair, let's look at that data binding, right? When data binding was first announced in Angular 2, everyone kind of went, oh my gosh, how are we going to write all that long syntax? But the way things work is you get it to work, and that's what the Angular team's done. They get the concepts right, then they get it to work, and then they work on the usability of it. And I think the router, and data binding is much more usable now, and I think router is at that stage now where it's let's just smooth off the edges, let's polish these corners, let's make it a little more usable from a developer standpoint. I think it's a good thing to use. I just think that it's not intuitive in some ways right now.
Agreed. And I think this is a good place where like you should download John Papa's repo, right? Like you do that. Like you got a demo, like play with it. And I think that this is a good time to try it out and see, okay, what don't I like? What do I like? And I think John a couple of times has said, like I've seen issues from him that said, it would be better if we did this, right? And now is a good time to sort of try it out and figure out what could be better, right? Like I think the Angular team is 30 people who can make so their own make their own best guesses. But this is a good time to try stuff out and say, maybe this could be better. Maybe this is a good thing. And I think you opened that issue about like the active link or whatever, John. That again, that's like a feature that.
The active link was one, and another. It's funny at the hack last night. Ward and I found some interesting things. Like you have to use title case now for your route names or your as's. They call them as, which is a weird name. So using the title case tripped a lot of people up last night. A big one was using the tuple inside of the link, trip people up. We had a lot of people really struggle to use the router last night in the hackathon, and it kind of surprised me because while I'm not necessarily happy with the way its usability is, I thought that it would be something that you could just say, oh, I get the syntax, move forward. Ward, don't you think that was your impression too, or did you say something different?
No, I saw the same thing. Now, I have a rat hole here, which is I can't understand why anybody would ever use a tuple in a public API. I think it's nifty cool internally as you're working things over, but can anybody tell me why they would ever say, wow, the public API for my widget is a tuple? Is there a worse choice than that? I throw that out there for you architects.
Yeah, again, like I mentioned it a little bit, but it's more of like what are the super secret, like amazing features of Angular 2, and that's AST bindings. So basically, the syntax for the router in that case would be like R or router, then colon, and then the argument. So there's going to be more sugar bits in the future. But the benefit of this like refactor, again, this refactor is literally like pushed in a few days ago. But one of the cool things about it is that you could convert your template into a tree. Just think of it as a JavaScript, just JSON tree, and then you're able to figure out like the components. So think of it as like one of the cool features is like being able to mimic one of the features in the browsers, and that's like prefetching links. So you could actually crawl the template, figure out what links are in this particular template, and then get the component out of there. And then from there, you're able to figure out like what data is needed. And then from there, you could like walk the whole component tree. There's a lot of like really cool advanced stuff you could do in Angular 2 because of this like huge refactor. But again, like there's reasons for like this terseness now. It's more of like they're just going to add more sugar later, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that the new compiler that landed a couple of days ago definitely caused some issues in 38, but I think that it's a huge step forward, and I think it's going to enable some really super cool stuff like that, like Sugar, and I have some ideas with observables on that. And like one of the really cool things about it is it does like offline template compilations. So effectively, you can write your templates, and then as a build step for production, you can pre-compile them into JavaScript, which means startup time is faster, and it's like there's a lot of really cool stuff that it's enabled. And so yeah, I think that kind of thing will definitely get better for sure.
Wow, all of that off of what's the current state of the Angular 2 router.
And 7,000 less lines of code is what I was told. So.
All right, we have 3 questions left in the hopper here. I don't know how much more time we all have. And one of them is kind of a large open-ended question. But we'll hit these first 2, and then we'll see where we get with the last one. So the first one is, any really good recent D3/Angular resources? What are some things to look at in regards to performance when implementing D3 with Angular? Pondering redoing a rather large view in D3.
I could touch that a little bit. So this goes all the way back to what we're talking about. So I'm going to talk in terms of like Angular 2, but it applies to Angular 1. So in Angular 2, you're able to interact with these Polymer components, which are just like black boxes. They're just this random like HTML, and then it emits native events, and then you interact with it. So you do the exact same thing with D3. You interact with this directive, and inside the directive, you do your D3 thing as you normally would. And basically, what you would do is, like, whenever you get new data, you just tell D3 to re-render, and then D3 will just manage that. And that's like the same thing applies for Angular 1 and 2, and that's how you would interact with the 2. I actually have a talk on this on NG Vegas about D3 and Angular.
Nice.
And I think the short answer to that is, like, there's a lot of stuff that, like, it's going to work the same, but I think that it'll be really cool to see what happens when people start, like, what does an Angular 2 D3 kind of D3 spec library look like, or like a D3, I don't know, component library that's built for Angular 2. What can we do with that? Can we make it reactive? I think there's some really cool stuff that'll come with this. And I'm looking at kind of the same thing. So if whoever asked that question wants to tweet me about it, I'd love to chat about it, because that's something I'm looking at for sure.
It's also worth noting that D3 is still in the jQuery days, and I say that as in like the declarative like querying days. Like what Rob's saying is, like, it would be way better to then like use the actual templating system to like actually manage your SVGs essentially. And I think someone made that in Angular 1, so it might be a good idea to like convert that to Angular 2 and then add more sugar.
Another thought about this is that what I didn't get from the question was what the motivation was to go to D3. It might have been to make some things that they could have done another way more performant, and in that case, you'll have the opportunity to reconsider your motivation and the outcome, because now that you can do things not only with dirty checking, but with immutable objects and with event-based objects. Some of the forces that might have driven you to say, well, maybe I should do this in D3, maybe those forces are no longer present, and you'll be able to do it in a way that is more natural to the problem that you have in front of me. Again, that's not a knock on D3. That's just simply a question of I can't tell why you went to why you're taking an existing view and moving it to D3. I just don't understand that part.
Yep. All right, next question. This one's addressed to Lucas. I am attending Angular Connect in 2 weeks. Should I see the real Angular keynote or well-behaved Angular 2 components with Jeremy and Tobias?
So the official answer is you should see the well-behaved Angular keynote.
The real well-behaved Angular 2 keynote component.
And that's going to be me. Shai is going to be the misbehaved Angular keynote. So it'll be a real good cop, bad cop routine there. Oh no, I've said too much.
All right, so the last question, this is the one that is open-ended. I think we could do an entire episode on this question. and that's what I want. That's why I'm saying we'll see where we get. And I'm also okay just punting and saying we'll cover this in a future episode. The question is how to structure a big Angular application.
With John Papa's style guide. Next. Mic drop.
It depends on everything, the use case.
Yeah.
Well, I read once that the secret to writing a really large app is to not write a really large app.
Yeah.
Bingo, bingo.
And that applies no matter what technology you adopt. You make a big app, and you're going to make a big mess, and I don't care what the technology is. That doesn't mean the problem set isn't big. That doesn't mean the features that you have to deliver aren't big. But the first thing you go after is to figure out how to break that down into sensibly sized workflows and models and processes, and see how you can make those operate as independently from each other as possible, and then weave them together in a sensible way so that the user feels comfortable as they move from one workflow to another. That's just good general advice. So, and after that, it's all commentary. It's all following the guidelines that you've seen. John's guidelines kind of lead you into that direction.
And I think one of the really neat things, having kind of tried to build a couple of things with it now, is that the idea of this component as it's not directives and element directives. There's not 7 ways to do everything now. There are effectively components, and I call them services or whatever you want to call them, right? But what Ward said there about don't build a gigantic application, I think is what you can kind of think about it is you're building a bunch of tiny little applications, right? Each component is sort of a mini app, if you like. And that's mini apps inside of mini apps. And so each little kind of component becomes this unit that you can move around, and the router is really good at that, right? If you think about the router as just moving you from mini app to mini app is a good way to think about it. Again, this is kind of stuff that we'll learn as we start to build them, but I think that the idea of a component, and again, going back to React, is kind of how React thinks about it as components, right? That is like a miniature app that you can kind of think about in isolation, I think is a good way to think about it. And then the thing that DI gives us is the ability to kind of, as you said, weave these things together and share stuff between them. And so yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting question to learn about, but definitely a bunch of components and like in an Angular 1 app and like in any good app, really thin kind of UI stuff and the vast majority of your logic in services, whatever you want to call them, right? It's model view controller, but with a different name, basically.
Yeah, I've been calling, you call them components and services. I do the same thing, but I also look at them more theoretically as nouns and verbs, right? We've got things in Angular 2 that are the nouns. They're the things that exist in our app. And then we've got, those are components. And then we've got the verbs. Those are things that are going to provide something, some kind of service to our application, filters, pipes, whatever you want to call them, services, classes. Those things are all actionable things that provide those components things. So it's really just 2 flavors, the way I break it down.
I think that the other unsung thing of testing an app, big or small, but especially big, is, hey, how about writing some tests? It would be just like, no, don't. Rob's shaking his head. No, don't write tests. Who wants those things? Yeah, I know. I can't wait to go to a client and see tests. But really, that's something that you should be able to do. That's something that the framework you choose should be helping you make your way through it. Be able to write tests sufficiently and feel good about them as you write them. And that's also something I think that Angular 2 is going to be good at. It's going to be easier to write your tests.
Testing it better be good in Angular 2, or Ward is going to lose it, because Ward is hard to make testing awesome in Angular 2.
What do you mean going to lose it?
I'm going to go crazy. I'm coming right to your house, and I'm going to get you if you don't test.
If you're worried about testing Angular 2, I can tell you that Ward has got you covered. Definitely. He's going to solve that problem. So.
True story, bro.
I think it's fair to say Ward Bell knows more about testing Angular 2 than anybody in this world at this moment in time.
Nah, you're killing me. You guys are killing me. You're just trying to, But keep it up, though. Keep it coming.
All right. Well, I think we've been going for about an hour, so I'm going to cut the questions off here. But do we want to do picks real quick, or do we want to just end the show?
Sure.
All right. We'll go ahead and do some quick picks. We'll start with the guys that aren't usually on the show. Patrick, do you have a pick or two for us?
Oh man, so I didn't plan for this, but my pick would be Angular 2.
That's cheating, but okay.
Yeah. No one else could pick it.
All right, Rob, show him up.
So my pick would be slightly more specific. I've just finished some refactoring on the Angular 2 HTTP library. And if you maybe wait till the next bump, there'll be some cool new stuff in it. But I'd really like people to play with it and kind of tell me about it and tell me about your use cases, because it's different than the first one. And so play with Angular 2 and observables is how that works. So like my picks are definitely observables and specifically Angular 2's HTTP library, because I'd love some input on how you're going to use it. There's an issue open on the Angular 2 repo right now about like transformers and interceptors and all that stuff that you do in Angular 1 today. I'd love you to play with the newer library and kind of tell me how you use it and what could be better and what kind of stuff you want to see.
All right. Ward, do you have a pick for us?
Testing.
No, that's not my pick. My pick is go find yourself a local hackathon, and surround yourself with other people who are stumbling around in the dark. Because I noticed that it was really encouraging when I was talking to the other people who were attending there, and they got a lot out of working with each other, finding things out together. Realizing that they had the same questions as other people and finding out what the different ways in which those questions could be answered, and it's a great way to get your feet wet rather than doing it in your closet at home.
Oh, can I jump back in? I have one that I just remembered, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Somebody asked a question about sort of two-way data binding in this one-way paradigm and how you use, how we sort of integrate with things and how we build custom components and one-way data flow versus two-way data binding. If you check out angulartips.com, Jesus has just written a really good little article on like how to build your own components, and I think it's a really good kind of introduction to the basic mechanics of how to build a component. So Angular 2 or angulartips.com is a good pick for sure.
All right, John, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I'd say I'll do an old pick for me. There's a motorcycle. That's not the pick. I'd say that my pick is Visual Studio Code. I think you want to find a good editor that you really love, but I've been really loving VS Code lately, and especially for its TypeScript and Angular 2 support. It's been doing great, and they just added recently, just now I think, theme support, so you can customize and create your own themes from pretty much any TextMate theme. So I know that's an important thing in my stable. I like my themes. I like to do dark so Ward can't see my code.
All right, Lucas, do you have some picks for us?
I do. So I thought actually Rob's talk that he gave at Angular Remote Conf, Everything is a Stream. I've actually watched that twice. I thought it was pretty awesome. I think hopefully the video will be available someday, somehow. And
can I just pile on and say I really thought so too, and not just because Rob is there staring at me, but it's true. It was really well done.
I don't know anything about when the videos will come out.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I watched the live stream. I observed that very closely.
Whoa, I see what you did there.
Uh-huh.
They'll
come out in about a month and a half.
Yay! So anyways, that was a great talk, but as a result of that, I started actually looking at Andre Staltz, who has done a lot of really good work on RxJS, and there's actually a series on Egghead about reactive programming, and so I watched that over the weekend, and it was just phenomenal. Like,
yeah, awesome series to watch.
Yep.
I subscribe to that theory, and I expect you to map your way right to it.
We actually recorded an episode about RxJS yesterday on JavaScript Jabber, so keep an eye out for that as well. I've got a couple of picks. I've been doing a video journal on Periscope, talking about what I'm thinking about, my business, and things like that. Since we have a video, I will show off what I have here. So I spent like $2.50 on the little tripod that I've got here. And then this clip that goes on top of it, I've got a clip It's spring-loaded, and it's big enough to hold my iPhone 5 Plus or iPhone 6 Plus, and it's just spring-loaded. So this one end of it comes out. It's got these rubber ends on it that hold the phone in place, so that when I'm talking to my phone, I can just set it in front of me, and then you get this nice view of my face. But it's been working out really well, and I've really enjoyed being able to kind of get feedback from people on some of the stuff that I'm thinking about through Periscope. So the Pixar Periscope, I'll put links to the tripod. I got it off of B&H Photo, and the phone holder clip thingy that I got off of Amazon.
I'm sorry, Chuck. What does having the phone pressed to your face do for you, and how does that relate to what is Periscope?
So Periscope is a way of basically doing a live video stream. It auto tweets to Twitter when you do it because Twitter owns it, and then the videos are available for 24 hours afterward. Incidentally, I'm also using a system called Catch.me, and Catch is spelled with a K, and it will actually download those videos for you off of Periscope so that you can make them available for longer than 24 hours. And so I'm planning on embedding those onto my blog, and just kind of having them out there so people can go back and watch them if they want, and put them on a podcast feed, because I've had some people asking where they can watch the older ones. So anyway, it's just kind of an interesting thing that I'm doing, because I have people asking me questions about podcasting, about business, about programming, and they want to know what I'm up to. So, I figure that's a good way to do it. And the other thing is it gives me a chance to kind of think out loud about some of the stuff I got going on. So, anyway, those are my picks. I just want to thank all of the folks who came. We had about 25 people at one point watching or listening on Crowdcast. We'll probably do this again. I think it was a pretty positive thing. And so, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Rob and Patrick for being willing to jump in. And
I'd like to do this again.
Yeah.
I like Rob's background. It's like way better than my refrigerator.
Yeah, we're gonna find out it's like a canvas behind him or something.
That's all right.
I'm waiting for the tiger to leap over the fence and bite his head, and I'm waiting for Patrick to go into that fridge and hand me a beer.
Yeah. I have tea.
That's not nearly as fun. All right. Oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast, but thanks again, everyone, for listening, and thanks to all our panelists for coming and answering questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
See y'all later.